The day I collapsed, I was standing in the kitchen pretending everything was fine. The coffee maker was sputtering, the sink was full of dishes, and a stack of unopened envelopes sat on the counter like silent witnesses to the mess my life had become. I remember staring at them, already knowing what they were before I even opened them. Medical reminders, credit card warnings, and the hospital bill from my last ER visit that I still hadn't paid. I slid one envelope open slowly, my fingers trembling. The number printed on the paper made my chest tighten. $3,842.17. I let out a shaky breath and folded it back like if I couldn't see it, it wouldn't be real. For 23 years, I had been the strong one in my family, the reliable one, the mother who never complained, the wife who held everything together. At least, that's what everyone used to say. Until my husband left. He didn't leave dramatically, no screaming, no slammed doors, just one quiet Saturday morning and a suitcase by the door. "I can't do this anymore, Lisa," he had said, not even looking at me properly. "I need a different life. A different life." As if the one we built together was just some phase he outgrew. He moved out that same day. And with him, he took more than his clothes. He took the savings account, the joint emergency fund, even the health insurance plan that had always been under his job. I didn't even understand how bad it was until a month later when my pharmacy told me my insurance was inactive. Inactive. Just like that. No warning, no discussion, no backup plan. I remember standing at the counter holding my blood pressure prescription while the pharmacist gave me that polite, sympathetic smile. "It'll be $126 without insurance." I nodded like I could afford it. Then I quietly put it back and walked out. That was the beginning of my quiet unraveling. I started cutting corners everywhere. Cheaper groceries, skipping my medication, ignoring the headaches, pretending the dizziness was just stress. My daughter, Emily, lived 2 states away and called every night. "You sound tired, Mom," she would say. "I'm fine, honey," I always replied, "just busy." I never told her the truth, that I was eating toast for dinner some nights, that I kept the heat lower to save on bills, that I had started waking up in the middle of the night with my heart racing and my chest feeling heavy. Because what kind of mother admits she's falling apart? That Tuesday morning, the dizziness hit harder than usual. I was rinsing a mug when my vision blurred around the edges. The room tilted slightly, like the floor had shifted under my feet. I gripped the counter and waited for it to pass. It didn't. Instead, a wave of pressure spread across my chest, slow and heavy, like something was sitting on me. "Not today," I whispered to myself. "Please, not today." I had a part-time shift at the bookstore in 3 hours. I couldn't afford to miss it. I couldn't afford anything anymore. I took a few deep breaths and tried to stand straight. That's when the pain sharpened. Sudden, tight, unforgiving. The mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the tile floor. The sound echoed louder than it should have. I remember reaching for my phone, my fingers clumsy and weak. My vision tunneled, dark spots flickering at the edges. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the stack of bills still sitting on the counter. When I woke up, everything smelled like antiseptic. The ceiling above me was bright white, dotted with fluorescent lights that made my eyes water. A steady beeping sounded somewhere to my right. Hospital. My throat felt dry. My arm was heavy. When I tried to move, I felt the tug of an IV. Panic hit instantly. Hospital meant doctors. Doctors meant tests. Tests meant bills. And bills meant a reality I couldn't escape. A nurse noticed I was awake and walked over with a gentle smile. "Hey there, Miss Carter, you gave us quite a scare." My voice came out hoarse. "What happened?" "You collapsed at home. Your neighbor found you after hearing the crash and called 911. Neighbor? I hadn't even known anyone was home. "You had dangerously high blood pressure and severe exhaustion," she continued softly. "The doctor wants to keep you for observation." Observation. That word alone made my stomach drop. "How long?" I asked. A couple of days, just to be safe. A couple of days in an American hospital. I didn't need to see the bill to know it would be catastrophic. The doctor came in later, a kind man in his 50s with tired eyes. "Lisa, your body has been under prolonged stress," he said. "Have you been taking your medication regularly?" I hesitated. That pause alone was enough. He sighed gently, not judgmental, just understanding. "You can't keep neglecting your health," he added. "This could have been much worse." I nodded, but my mind wasn't on my health. It was on money. Always money. After he left, a billing coordinator stepped in with a clipboard and a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'll just need to confirm your insurance information," she said. My heart pounded. "I don't have active insurance right now." She paused for a fraction of a second, just enough for me to see the shift. "Oh," she replied carefully, "that's okay. We'll still make sure you receive care." But we both knew what that meant. Care first, crushing bill later. She handed me a folder. "I'll leave an estimate here for when you're ready," she said gently before stepping out. I stared at the folder for a long time before opening it. My hands were shaking so badly the paper crinkled. Then I saw the number. Estimated charges, $18,000 plus. The room suddenly felt smaller. My chest tightened, not from illness this time, but from pure fear. $18,000. I didn't even have 1,800. Tears slid silently down my temples into my hair as I lay there staring at the ceiling. All I could think of was one thing. I am going to ruin my daughter's future. Because no matter how much I pretended to be independent, she would find out. She would insist on helping. She would take on my burden like I had always taken on everyone else's. And I couldn't let that happen. That night, I barely slept. The hospital was quiet, filled with distant footsteps and soft machine noises. Nurses went and went, the hallway lights dimmed, but my mind refused to rest. I kept replaying my life over and over. The marriage I gave everything to, the man who walked away without warning, the years of silence and sacrifice. And now, this, a hospital bed I couldn't afford. Around 7 a.m., a nurse walked in holding a new envelope. "Good morning," she said softly, placing it on the tray table beside me. I frowned slightly. "For my account?" She nodded. "Yes, it's already been processed." My stomach twisted. Processed? With trembling fingers, I reached for the envelope, my name written neatly on the front. Lisa Carter. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small handwritten note. I opened the bill first. Then my entire body froze. Balance due, $0.00. Paid in full. My breath caught in my throat. "No," I whispered. My hands started shaking as I grabbed the note next. It was written in simple blue ink, just one sentence, and the moment I read it, my heart shattered in a way I never expected. My hands trembled so badly, I had to steady the paper against the tray table just to read the note again. The handwriting was neat, careful, almost gentle. "You reminded me of my mother on the day no one helped her." That was it. No name, no explanation, no signature. Just that one sentence. My chest tightened, and not from fear this time, from something deeper, something heavier. I stared at the words until they blurred, my vision filling with tears I didn't even realize were falling. A stranger had paid my hospital bill. Not a charity organization, not a hospital program, not an insurance miracle. A stranger. And the note didn't say, "Feel better." It didn't say, "God bless you." It didn't even say, "Take care." It said something that felt personal, painful, intentional. "You reminded me of my mother on the day no one helped her." The words echoed in my mind like a quiet confession. The nurse returned a few minutes later, checking my vitals like it was a normal morning, like my life hadn't just been flipped upside down. "Excuse me," I asked softly, my voice still shaky. "The bill, it says paid. Who paid it?" She gave a small smile. the kind that told me she already knew what I was talking about. "We're not allowed to share personal information unless the donor requests it," she said gently, "but I can tell you it was done privately, in full." "In full?" I repeated faintly. She nodded. "Yes, ma'am." I swallowed hard, clutching the note tighter. "Did they leave anything else? A name? A message?" She shook her head. "Just that envelope." Then she hesitated before adding quietly, "They came in person." My heart skipped. "They came here?" "Yes, yesterday evening. Spoke with billing for a while." Yesterday evening, while I was lying in this bed, crying silently and calculating how much of my life I would have to sell to survive. A stranger had been standing at a desk paying $18,000 for me. I pressed the note to my chest as the nurse left. I didn't know why, but the sentence hurt more than the amount of money. "You reminded me of my mother." What had they seen? An exhausted woman alone in a hospital bed? A middle-aged patient with no insurance? Someone who looked abandoned? The thought made my stomach twist. Later that afternoon, the billing coordinator came back, her tone noticeably softer than the day before. "Miss Carter, I just wanted to confirm you received the updated statement," she said. "I did. I don't understand." She pulled up a chair. "The individual requested complete anonymity," she explained. "They only said they wanted to cover your full medical expenses, including observation and medications." "Why?" The word slipped out before I could stop it. She paused. "They didn't say much," she admitted, "just that sometimes people need help before they ask for it." That sentence hit me like a wave, because I had never asked for help. Not from my husband, not from my family, not even from my daughter. I had just been drowning silently. After she left, I finally called Emily. I hadn't told her about the collapse yet. I didn't want to scare her. But now, with everything happening, I couldn't hide it anymore. She picked up on the second ring. "Mom, is everything okay? You never called this early." My throat tightened instantly. "I'm in the hospital." Silence. Then the sound of her breathing changing. "What? Mom, what do you mean hospital? What happened? Are you hurt? Why didn't you tell me?" "I'm okay," I said quickly, tears forming again. "I collapsed at home, stress and blood pressure." Her voice cracked. "I'm booking a flight right now." "No," I said firmly, surprising even me. "Emily," I interrupted softly, "listen to me. I'm stable. The doctors say I'll be discharged soon." She was quiet for a moment before asking the question I had been dreading. "How much is the bill?" My grip on the note tightened. "It's paid," I whispered. Another silence, longer this time. "Paid?" she repeated. "By who?" "A stranger." I heard her inhale sharply. "Mom, that doesn't just happen." "I know." I looked down at the note again, tracing the ink with my fingertip. "They left a message." "What did it say?" My voice broke slightly as I read it aloud. "You reminded me of my mother on the day no one helped her." On the other end of the phone, Emily didn't speak for several seconds. Then, very softly, she asked, "Mom, were you really that alone?" That question shattered something inside me, because the honest answer was yes. "Yes," I admitted, my voice trembling. "I didn't want to burden you or anyone." Her breathing turned shaky. "You skipped your medication, didn't you?" I closed my eyes. "Yes." "And the insurance?" she asked quietly. "It ended when your father left." The line went completely silent. Not shocked silence, not confused silence, heartbroken silence. "He knew," she finally said, her voice filled with disbelief. "He knew your health issues and he still canceled the insurance?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She let out a slow, painful breath. I thought you were okay, Mom. You always sounded so strong. I laughed weakly through my tears. I was pretending. That word hung heavily between us. Pretending I wasn't struggling. Pretending I wasn't scared. Pretending I wasn't slowly falling apart in an empty house. After we hung up, I finally stared at the hospital room around me differently. Yesterday, it had felt like a place of fear. Now it felt like a place where my life had quietly been saved. Not just medically, emotionally. Because the truth I had been avoiding finally surfaced in my mind. I hadn't collapsed only from stress. I had collapsed from loneliness, from years of swallowing pain, from abandonment I never processed, from the exhausting habit of being the strong one. That evening, I asked the front desk one more time if there was any way to thank the person who paid my bill. The receptionist shook her head apologetically. She said they specifically requested no contact, but they did leave one more instruction. My heart jumped. What instruction? She looked down at her screen, then back at me. They said to make sure you received your prescription medication before discharge, prepaid. My breath caught. Even my medication? Not just the bill, not just the hospital stay, but the very thing I had been quietly sacrificing to survive. My legs felt weak as I slowly sat back down in the chair. That stranger hadn't just paid my bill. They had noticed the kind of suffering that doesn't show on charts. The silent kind. The kind my own husband never saw. The kind I never admitted to my daughter. The kind I hid behind polite smiles and "I'm fine." I looked at the note again, and for the first time, I didn't just feel gratitude. I felt guilt, because somewhere, at some point, their mother needed help, and no one showed up. And now, somehow, a broken woman in a hospital bed had reminded them of that loss. Tears streamed down my face as the weight of that realization finally sunk in. A stranger didn't just pay my bill, they saw me. I didn't get discharged the next morning like I expected. Instead, the doctor insisted I stay one more day to stabilize my blood pressure and monitor my stress levels. Normally, that would have sent me into another spiral of anxiety about costs. But now, every time that fear started to creep in, my eyes drifted back to the folded note on my bedside table. You reminded me of my mother on the day no one helped her. I read it at least 20 times. Each time it hurt in a different way, not because it was cruel, but because it was painfully human. That afternoon, a social worker named Karen knocked softly on my door. "Hi, Lisa," she said warmly, stepping inside with a gentle smile. "I'm part of the patient support team. The billing department asked me to check in with you." My first instinct was embarrassment. "I promise I wasn't trying to avoid payment," I blurted out quickly. "I just lost my insurance after my husband left, and—" She held up a hand kindly. "You don't need to explain or apologize." That simple sentence made my throat tighten. How long had it been since someone told me I didn't have to justify my struggle? She pulled a chair closer to my bed and spoke softly. "I'm here because when large anonymous payments are made, we like to make sure the patient has support going forward, especially if there were financial or personal stress factors involved." Personal stress factors. That was a gentle way of saying your life has been falling apart. I let out a slow breath and stared at my hands. "My husband left 6 months ago," I admitted quietly. "He took the savings, the insurance, everything." Karen didn't react with shock or pity, just quiet understanding. "And you didn't tell your daughter?" she asked gently. I shook my head. "She just started her career. I didn't want to burden her." She nodded slowly. "So you carried the burden alone." That sentence landed heavier than any diagnosis. "Yes," I whispered. She glanced at the note on my table. "Did you know the donor?" "No." "Did you expect anyone to help?" I let out a weak, almost humorless laugh. No, because the truth was simple. I had stopped expecting help a long time ago. After she left, I finally forced myself to do something I had been avoiding since the envelope arrived. I asked the nurse what time the stranger had come. Late afternoon, she said, around 5 p.m. They stood at the billing desk for a long time, didn't seem rushed. Did they see them? I asked hesitatingly. Only briefly. My heart pounded. Were they older, younger? Middle-aged, she replied. Maybe late 40s or 50s, dressed simply, very calm. A strange ache settled in my chest. Close to my age, not some millionaire, not some distant charity, just a regular person. Did they ask about me? I asked softly. The nurse nodded. They asked if you had visitors. My stomach dropped. And, I whispered, we told them you were alone most of the time, she said gently. That was it. That was the moment. That was what they saw. Not just a patient, not just a bill, but a middle-aged woman lying in a hospital bed with no one sitting beside her. My eyes filled with tears before I could stop them. They didn't help me because I looked strong. They helped me because I looked alone. That realization was more painful than any medical diagnosis. That evening, Emily called again. This time, her voice was different, quieter, heavier. I talked to HR today, she said. I'm adding you to my insurance plan during the next enrollment period. My immediate response was instinctive. Emily, no, that's expensive. You just started your job. Mom, stop. I froze. I grew up watching you skip new clothes so I could have school supplies. You worked double shifts when Dad's business struggled. You never once called yourself a burden. Tears slid silently down my cheeks. You don't get to call yourself one now, she added softly. Her words broke through something deep inside me. For years, I had measured my worth by how little trouble I caused others, how quiet I stayed, how much I endured, how well I pretended everything was fine. But lying in that hospital bed, with a stranger's note in my hand and my daughter's voice shaking on the phone, I finally saw the truth. My silence hadn't been strength. It had been slow self-destruction. That night, I couldn't sleep. The hallway outside was dim, nurses' footsteps echoing softly every now and then. I picked up the note again and traced the ink like it might reveal more if I looked hard enough. You reminded me of my mother on the day no one helped her. I tried to imagine that day. Was she sick? Was she scared? Was she alone in a waiting room while people walked past her? Did she ask for help and get ignored? Or was she like me, smiling politely, saying I'm fine, while quietly falling apart? My chest tightened as another thought hit me. What if their mother didn't survive that day? The note didn't say she was helped. It said no one helped her. And now, years later, her child saw a stranger in the same position and refused to let history repeat itself. The weight of that kindness felt almost overwhelming, not just generous, intentional, personal. The next morning, I was officially cleared for discharge. A nurse handed me a small bag with my prescribed medication already labeled and paid for. I held it like it was something fragile, something sacred. When I slowly stood up, my legs felt steadier than they had in months, not just physically, emotionally. As I walked past the billing desk on my way out, I paused. This might be a strange question, but, she said softly, when the person paid my bill, did they say anything else before leaving? She thought for a moment. Actually, she said slowly, yes. My heart started pounding. They looked at your file for a second, then they said, make sure she gets her medication. My mom skipped hers too. The world around me went quiet. Skipped hers too? My grip tightened around the prescription bag. That wasn't random kindness. That was recognition. That was someone who had lived through watching a strong woman slowly neglect herself until it was too late. Tears blurred my vision as I stepped outside the hospital doors. For the first time since my husband left, the air felt different against my skin, lighter, sharper, real. I sat on a bench near the entrance, clutching the note in one hand and my medication in the other, and for the first time since my husband left, I cried without trying to be quiet, because a stranger had seen the version of me I was desperately hiding from the world. The exhausted mother, the abandoned wife, the woman pretending everything was fine while skipping medicine and meals. And instead of judging me, they chose compassion. But what truly broke me wasn't the money. It was the realization that someone who had already lost their mother had spent thousands of dollars to save a stranger from the same fate. I didn't go straight home after I was discharged. Instead, I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot for almost 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel and staring at nothing. The engine was off. The world outside moved normally, nurses walking to their shifts, families helping loved ones into cars, ambulances pulling in with flashing lights. Life going on. And yet, mine felt like it had quietly split into two parts, before the note and after the note. I unfolded it again, even though I had memorized every letter. You reminded me of my mother on the day no one helped her. For the first time, I didn't just feel sadness when I read it. I felt responsibility, because whoever that person was, they didn't just give me money, they handed me a second chance. And I suddenly realized something uncomfortable. If I went back to my old habits, skipping medication, pretending I was fine, isolating myself, I would be repeating the same story their mother lived and maybe died from. That thought shook me. When I finally got home, the house felt different. It had felt empty before, hollow. Now it felt fragile, like it was waiting to see what I would choose next. The unpaid bills were still on the counter. The electricity notice hadn't magically disappeared. My husband's absence still echoed in every quiet corner, but something inside me had shifted. For the first time in months, I didn't feel ashamed. I felt awake. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a number I had avoided for weeks. My sister, Rebecca. We hadn't spoken much since my husband left, not because she didn't care, but because I kept insisting I was handling it. I pressed call before I could change my mind. She answered on the third ring. Lisa, everything okay? I swallowed. I need help, I said. The silence on the other end lasted only a second. Okay, she replied gently. Tell me how. No judgment, no lecture, just that. I sank down into a kitchen chair, tears spilling freely now. I've been pretending I was fine, I admitted. I'm not. And for the first time, I told someone the whole truth about the insurance, the savings being drained, the skipped medication, the collapse. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. Oh, Lisa, she whispered. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want to be a burden. Her tone changed, soft but firm. You are not a burden. You were married one. That unexpected bluntness almost made me laugh through my tears. Over the next hour, we made actual plans, real ones. She helped me look into short-term insurance options. She connected me with a financial counselor her friend recommended. She insisted I come stay with her for a week if I needed space. For the first time since my husband walked out, I wasn't making survival decisions alone. That evening, Emily called again. I've been thinking, she said. What if this stranger didn't just pay your bill to help you? What do you mean? What if they paid it so you wouldn't feel invisible anymore? The words settled deep. Invisible. That's exactly how I had felt for months. Invisible in my marriage, invisible in my struggle, invisible in my own pain. But a stranger had seen me, and that changed something fundamental inside me. A week later, I went back to the hospital, not as a patient, as someone looking for answers. I didn't expect them to break anonymity rules. I just needed something. The same receptionist was there. "Hi," I said softly. "I know you can't tell me who paid my bill. I understand that. But is there any way you could pass along a message?" She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "If they ever contact us again, we can note it in the file." I pulled a small folded letter from my purse. "I just want them to know something," I said. She accepted it gently. "What would you like it to say?" I hesitated, then answered honestly. "Tell them their mother would be proud of them." My voice broke halfway through the sentence. The receptionist's eyes softened. "I'll make sure it's documented," she said quietly. As I walked out of the hospital that day, I felt lighter, not because I had closure, but because I had chosen to respond with kindness, with intention. The weeks that followed weren't magically easy. I still had bills to manage. I still had to rebuild financially. I still had moments where loneliness crept in at night. But I didn't skip my medication anymore. Not once. Every time I held the pill bottle, I remembered the note. My mom skipped hers too. I started therapy, something I had always considered unnecessary before. I joined a local support group for women going through divorce after 40. I even picked up extra hours at the bookstore and began researching certification programs to increase my income. Small steps, but real ones. Then, one afternoon, about 2 months later, something happened that brought everything full circle. I was standing in line at a pharmacy when I noticed an older woman in front of me arguing quietly with the cashier. "I'll just come back," she said, embarrassed. I didn't realize the copay was that high. Her hands were shaking as she gathered her purse. I felt my chest tighten in a familiar way. I knew that tone, that polite withdrawal, that quiet surrender. I stepped forward before I could overthink it. "I've got it," I said gently. She turned, startled. "Oh no, honey, you don't have to." "I know," I replied gently, "but I want to." The cashier rang it up. It wasn't $18,000. It was $47.63. But to her, it looked impossible. As she looked at me with watery eyes, I felt something powerful settle inside me. Not pride, not superiority, connection. "I hope someone was kind to you when you needed it," she said softly. I swallowed hard. "Yes, they were," I replied. That night, I placed the stranger's note back in its envelope and tucked it into my dresser drawer, not as a reminder of my lowest moment, but as proof of something greater. Proof that kindness doesn't just save lives, it restarts them. And sometimes the most heartbreaking sentence you'll ever read becomes the reason you decide to live differently. Life didn't suddenly become perfect after that day at the pharmacy. Healing, I learned, is not dramatic. It is quiet, repetitive, sometimes exhausting, but it is real. Every morning, I took my medication with a glass of water and a deep breath, like it was a small promise to someone I had never met, a promise I refused to break. I stopped lying when people asked how I was. Instead of saying, "I'm fine," I started saying, "I'm getting better." And somehow that felt more honest. 3 months passed. My blood pressure stabilized. My therapy sessions became less about survival and more about understanding the years I had spent shrinking myself to make everyone else comfortable. Emily visited twice, each time hugging me a little tighter than before, like she was making up for the months she didn't know I was struggling. One evening, while we were making dinner together, she opened my drawer looking for a spare towel. That's when she found the envelope. "Mom, what's this?" she asked softly. I froze for a moment, then walked over and took it from her hands. "The note," I said quietly. She didn't open it immediately. She looked at me first. "Can I read it?" I nodded. Her eyes moved slowly across the page. I watched her face change in real time. Curiosity, confusion, then something deeper, something emotional. She pressed her lips together when she finished. "That's heartbreaking," she whispered. "Yes," I replied. "It is." She sat down at the table, still holding the paper carefully like it was fragile. "They didn't just pay your bill," she said after a long pause. "They relived something painful while doing it." That sentence stayed with me long after she left that weekend. Relived something painful. I had been so focused on my own crisis that I hadn't fully absorbed the emotional weight behind that note. Someone had stood at that billing desk, looked at my file, and seen a memory. Not a stranger, a reflection. A middle-aged woman, high stress, no insurance, skipping medication, alone most of the time. I fit the pattern of a story they had already lived once before, and maybe lost. A few weeks later, I did something I hadn't done since my husband left. I went through our old paperwork, not to torture myself, but to finally face reality instead of avoiding it. Bank statements, insurance cancellations, withdrawals I had ignored because I trusted him blindly. As I sat at the dining table, documents spread around me. Something unexpected happened. I didn't feel rage. I felt clarity. For the first time, I stopped romanticizing my marriage and saw it for what it had quietly become in its final years, emotionally distant, financially unbalanced, and built on my constant self-sacrifice. I called it loyalty, but sometimes loyalty to the wrong person becomes betrayal to yourself. That realization didn't make me bitter. It made me stronger. Around the 4th month after my hospital stay, I received a call from the hospital. My heart immediately raced. "Ms. Carter?" the receptionist asked warmly. "This is just a courtesy follow-up from patient services. We do wellness check-ins for certain cases." Certain cases. I knew exactly what that meant. "Yes," I said softly. She paused, then added, "Also, I wanted to let you know your letter has been kept on file just as requested." My grip tightened on the phone. "They haven't contacted you?" I asked before I could stop myself. "No," she replied gently, "but sometimes anonymous donors check back on patient outcomes months later." Check back. Not for praise, not for recognition, but to see if their kindness actually changed anything. After the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time. Then I walked to my dresser, took out the note, and read it again. But this time, I read it differently. Not as a message of sorrow, but as a warning. "You reminded me of my mother on the day no one helped her." For the first time, I asked myself the question I had been unconsciously avoiding. What if they hadn't helped me? The answer came instantly. I would have been discharged with a crushing debt. I would have skipped medication again. I would have isolated further out of shame. And eventually, my health would have collapsed all over again. Maybe worse. Maybe permanently. That stranger didn't just remove a bill. They interrupted a downward spiral I was too exhausted to stop on my own. 6 months after my collapse, I stood in front of a small community center podium, my hands slightly nervous but steady. It was a local women's support event, divorce recovery and financial independence after 40, something I would never have attended before, and definitely never spoken at. But when the organizer asked if anyone wanted to share their story, my hand raised before fear could stop me. "I'm Lisa," I began, my voice soft but clear. "And 6 months ago, I collapsed in my kitchen because I was too ashamed to admit I was struggling." The room went silent. I told them everything: the insurance loss, the silent suffering, the hospital bill, and the note. When I read the sentence aloud, several women wiped their eyes. One of them raised her hand gently. "Do you still feel broken?" she asked. I thought about that question carefully. Then I smiled for the first time without forcing it. No, I said. I feel seen, because that was the truth. A stranger's kindness had done what pride, silence, and endurance never could. It forced me to acknowledge my pain. It forced me to accept help. It forced me to live like my life had value, even when I had quietly started believing it didn't. That night, as I drove home, something inside me finally settled. Not the sadness, not the memory, but the meaning. The note had broken me the day I read it because it revealed how alone I had become. But over time, it rebuilt me because it showed me something even more powerful. Kindness is not always soft. Sometimes it confronts you with the truth you've been avoiding. And sometimes the person who saves you is someone who simply refuses to let your story end the way theirs once did. Nearly a year after my hospital stay, I found myself back in the same building. Not as a patient, not as someone afraid of numbers on a bill, but as a volunteer. The first time I walked through those sliding glass doors again, my chest tightened in a way that surprised me. The smell of antiseptic, the soft hum of machines, the quiet conversations in hallways, it all came rushing back at once. For a moment, I was no longer the woman in control of her life. I was the exhausted, silent version of myself, lying in a hospital bed, staring at an impossible bill and wondering if my existence had become a financial burden. I paused near the reception desk, steadying my breath. "You okay?" Karen's voice came gently from behind me. I turned and smiled. "Yeah, just memories." She nodded knowingly. "That's normal, but you're not the same person who left here last year." No, I wasn't. Back then, I left with a paid bill, a bag of medication, and a broken heart from a single handwritten note. Now, I walked in with purpose. It started small, a few hours a week helping patients fill out forms, sitting beside elderly women who didn't have visitors, guiding confused families toward financial assistance resources, sometimes just listening. Listening, I learned, was one of the rarest forms of kindness. One afternoon, I sat beside a woman about my age in the waiting area. She was staring at a folder in her lap, her fingers gripping it tightly. I recognized that look instantly. Fear disguised as composure. "They gave you the estimate?" I asked softly. Her eyes snapped toward me, surprised. "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. She opened the folder slightly and let out a shaky breath. "I don't know how I'm going to pay this. I haven't told my kids. I don't want them to worry." My chest ached. The same words, the same pride, the same quiet suffering. A year ago, that had been me. "I understand," I said gently. "More than you think." She studied my face, searching for judgment. There was none, only recognition. "I thought I was strong for handling everything alone," she confessed, "but I think I'm just tired." That sentence hit me deeply because it echoed something I had once whispered to myself in the dark. Not weak, just tired. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small folded copy of the note. Not the original, I kept that safely at home, but a copy I carried as a reminder. I didn't hand it to her. I simply held it for a moment and said, "Strength isn't silence, and asking for help isn't failure." Her eyes filled with tears almost instantly, and in that moment, I finally understood something that had taken me an entire year to fully accept. The stranger hadn't just changed my life, they had changed the way I showed up in other people's lives. That evening, when I got home, I opened my dresser and took out the original envelope again. The paper was slightly worn now from being unfolded so many times. You reminded me of my mother on the day no one helped her. For the first time since the hospital, I didn't cry when I read it. Instead, I whispered quietly, she wasn't forgotten. Because through their kindness, their mother's story didn't end in silence. It transformed into compassion for someone else. For me. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. I received a letter from the hospital. Not a bill, not paperwork, just a simple envelope with the hospital logo. My heart pounded as I opened it. Inside was a short message from patient services. We occasionally receive follow-up inquiries from anonymous donors regarding patient outcomes. We are happy to confirm that your recovery and continued wellness were shared as requested, without personal details. My hands froze. They checked. They never wanted recognition. They never asked for thanks. But they wanted to know if I was okay. Tears filled my eyes instantly. A stranger, somewhere out there, had quietly wondered if the woman they helped had survived, not just physically, but emotionally. I sat down slowly, pressing the letter to my chest. I'm okay, I whispered into the quiet room. And for the first time, I truly meant it. Not because my life was perfect. My husband never came back. The financial rebuilding took time. Loneliness still visited occasionally. But I was no longer invisible to myself. I took my medication regularly. I spoke honestly about my struggles. I accepted help without shame. And most importantly, I extended kindness whenever I saw silent suffering in someone else. Months later, on the exact anniversary of my hospital discharge, I did something that felt deeply personal. I returned to the billing department. The same desk, the same quiet atmosphere, the same place where a stranger once changed my life forever. I'd like to make a payment, I told the receptionist. She looked confused. For an account? Yes, I said softly. For someone who needs it. It wasn't $18,000, not even close, but it was what I could afford after a year of rebuilding. She smiled gently as she processed it. Would you like to leave a note? My heart skipped. Yes, I whispered. She handed me a small card and a pen. I stared at the blank space for a long moment. Then I wrote carefully, You are not alone. Please take your medication. Your life matters more than any bill. I paused. Then, after a deep breath, I added one final line. Someone once saved me. Now I'm passing it forward. As I handed the card back, my chest felt lighter than it had in years, because I finally understood the full truth behind that heartbreaking note. It didn't break me because it was sad. It broke me because it revealed how close I had come to disappearing quietly under the weight of pride, abandonment, and silent suffering. A stranger didn't just pay my hospital bill. They interrupted my self-neglect. They exposed my loneliness. They forced me to accept that my life still had value, even when I had stopped believing it did. And in doing so, they gave me far greater than financial relief. They gave me permission to live like I mattered. The moral I carry now is simple, but it changed everything. Sometimes the kindest people in the world are those who know exactly what it feels like when no one shows up. And sometimes a single act of quiet kindness doesn't just solve a problem, it saves a life that was slowly giving up in silence.